Float. Verb. 1. Intransitive, of an object or substance, to be supported by a liquid of greater density than the object so as that part of the object or substance remains above the surface. For example, the boat floated on the water. 2. Transitive, to cause something to be suspended in a liquid of greater density, as, to float a boat. 3. Intransitive, to be capable of floating. For example, that boat doesn't float. 4. Intransitive, to move in a particular direction with the liquid in which one is floating. For example, I'd love to just float downstream. 5. Intransitive, to drift or wander aimlessly. For example, I'm not sure where they went, they're floating around here somewhere. 6. Intransitive, to drift gently through the air. For example, the balloon floated off into the distance. 7. Intransitive, to move in a fluid manner. For example, the dancer floated gracefully around the stage. 8. Intransitive, colloquial, of an idea or scheme, to be viable. For example, that's a daft idea, it'll never float. 9. Transitive, to propose an idea for consideration. For example, I floated the idea of free ice cream on Fridays, but no one was interested. 10. Intransitive, to automatically adjust a parameter as related parameters change. 11. Intransitive, finance, of currencies, to have an exchange value determined by the markets as opposed to by rule. For example, the yen floats against the dollar. 12. Transitive, finance, to allow the exchange value of a currency to be determined by the markets. For example, the government floated the pound in January. 13. Transitive, colloquial, to extend a short-term loan to. For example, could you float me $50 until payday? 14. Transitive, finance, to issue or sell shares in a company, or units in a trust, to members of the public, followed by listing on a stock exchange. 15. Transitive, to use a float tool. For example, it is time to float this horse's teeth. 16. Poker, to perform a float. Float. Noun. 1. A buoyant device used to support something in water or another liquid. For example, attach the float and the weight to the fishing line, above the hook. 2. A mass of timber or boards fastened together, and conveyed down the stream by the current, a raft. 3. A float board. 4. A tool similar to a rasp, used in various trades. 5. A sort of trowel used for finishing concrete surfaces or smoothing plaster. For example, when pouring a new driveway, you can use a 2x4 as a float. 6. An elaborately decorated trailer or vehicle, intended for display in a parade or pageant. For example, that float covered in roses is very pretty. 7. UK, a small vehicle used for local deliveries, especially in the term milk float. 8. Finance, funds committed to be paid but not yet paid. For example, our bank does a nightly sweep of accounts, to adjust the float so we stay within our reserves limit. 9. Finance, Australia, and other Commonwealth countries. An offering of shares in a company, or units in a trust, to members of the public, normally followed by a listing on a stock exchange. For example, 2006, you don't actually need a broker to buy shares in a float when a company is about to be listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. Australian Securities and Investments Commission Financial Tips article, Buying Shares in a Float. 10. Banking, the total amount of checks or other drafts written against a bank account but not yet cleared and charged against the account. For example, no sir, your current float is not taken into account when assets are legally garnished. 11. Insurance, premiums taken in but not yet paid out. For example, we make a lot of interest from our nightly float. 12. Programming, a floating point number. For example, that routine should not have used an int, it should be a float. 13. A soft beverage with a scoop of ice cream floating in it. For example, it's true, I don't consider anything other than a root beer with vanilla ice cream to be a real float. 14. A small sum of money put in a cashier's till at the start of business to enable change to be made. 15. Poker, a maneuver where player calls on the flop or turn with a weak hand, with the intention of bluffing after a subsequent community card. 16. Knitting, one of the loose ends of yarn on an unfinished work. 17. Automotive, a car carrier or car transporter truck or truck and trailer combination. 18. Transport, a lowboy trailer. 19. Tempering, a device sending a copious stream of water to the heated surface of a bulky object, such as an anvil or die. For example, can we find and add a quotation of night to this entry? 20. Obsolete, the act of flowing, flux, flow. For example, can we find and add a quotation of Francis Bacon to this entry? 21. A quantity of earth, 18 feet square and 1 foot deep. For example, can we find and add a quotation of Mortimer to this entry? 22. A polishing block used in marble working, a runner. For example, can we find and add a quotation of night to this entry? 23. UK, dated, a coal cart. For example, can we find and add a quotation of Simmons to this entry?